The following podcast is a presentation of This Is Infamous. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to a brand new edition of the Lifted Embargo, the movie podcast where we review movies, particularly the brand new releases that will be heading to your local neighborhood cinemas this particular weekend. Every week, I try to bring in a brand new rotating crop of critics to join me, Billy Donnelly, your host of thisisinfamous.com, to discuss what it is that you may have the potential to see if you buy yourself a ticket on any given weekend. And this week, I did not rotate at all. Oddly, I think this is the first time we've ever had someone come on in back-to-back weeks. He likes to now be billed as the Charles Nelson Riley of the podcast, which I have no problem with. I actually, almost, in all honesty, I actually inquired with a couple of other people about trying to bring on a Brett Summers and doing a three-way dance for a podcast. It did not come to fruition this week, maybe in the future weeks. But right now, you can find his work at USA Today and follow him online on Twitter at Brian Truitt. So Brian Truitt joins me back-to-back weeks.
Yeah, I got my Charles Nelson Riley pipe and my name tag and everything.
Do you have an ascot?
I'm wearing an ascot. I'm totally wearing an ascot too. It's great.
That's excellent because I have now converted my podcast microphone to one of those long-stemmed microphones.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And so now if, like I said, if we could get a Brett Summers, if we could find perhaps a Richard Dawson, I'm going to just scrap the entire movie review podcast format, and we'll do the match game, because I love that show. The original match game. Yeah, good, clean, dirty 70s entertainment. So this week we have two films that we're going to talk about on the docket this week, Blair Witch as well as Snowden. Right before we started to record, Brian did remind me that there is a third Bridget Jones film hitting theaters also this weekend. We will not be talking about that film. In all honesty, I forgot it even existed. And I don't believe that I saw the first two, so I don't think seeing the third one and jumping in at that point in time, where she has a baby now. Is that what it is?
Yeah, she gets impregnated and she doesn't know who the father is.
Yeah, I don't know that would have done anything for me. So if you're interested in Bridget Jones's baby, there are reviews out there for you to get caught up on. You're just not going to find one on this particular podcast. So with that said, let's get right into the magic that we're going to make on this podcast by talking about the two films that are on the docket this week. And we're going to start with Blair Witch. Blair Witch is the sequel of sorts to the 1999 film, found footage film, The Blair Witch Project. This time directed by Adam Wingard with his frequent collaborator Simon Barrett handling stripping duties. And it stars James Allen McCune, Kelly Hernandez, Brandon Scott, Corbin Reed, Wes Robinson, and Valerie Curry as another group of people heading out into the woods, this time for answers connected back to the first film and the disappearance of Heather Donahue, one of the ringleader of that crew in that particular film. This one now takes place 17 years later, once again heading into the Black Hills Forest near Burkittsville, where, as we can all suspect, evil lurks somewhere amongst the trees. So with that basically being the synopsis, the premise for Blair Witch, before we do get into the film itself, let's sort of lay out our credentials with, I guess, the Blair Witch Project and how that film sort of played for us first, and then we can get into this one. So Brian, the Blair Witch Project, many years ago, what were your feelings on that film? How did you sort of experience that one? How does that one resonate with you in your sort of cinematic history?
I did like it. I remember I didn't see it in the theater, but I did see it like at midnight on a big TV like at home. And so I turned out all the lights to get the whole. I didn't see it on the big screen, but I did try to get the right atmosphere at home with a DVD. It played well. I mean, I really did like it because we hadn't seen a found footage movie like that at that point. So it was really innovative in terms of how the camera moved, how nobody was ever quite in focus because it was just like pure chaos and people running around and so they really captured the fact of like 4 young nitwits going out into the woods and trying to find a witch. I mean, in what that would look like if it really happened. I think it really nailed a lot of things, and it was interesting because the ending I know a lot of people feel the same way. I got to the ending and I was like, okay, that's it, really? And I, like a lot of people, missed like the dude standing in the corner and what that meant. And I had to go back and watch it again. And then because it was just kind of dumb at that point. I was in my early 20s. I was dumb. So I was, you have to watch it again. You're like, oh, okay, now I get it. So and so you got the creepiness a little bit. But it was so innovative at that point, and it did so much for the horror genre at that point because I don't remember there being many good horror movies at all. And then I think that jumpstarted a lot of kind of the indie stuff that we saw later, like Paranormal Activity. People figured out that like they didn't have to have like a lot of money to pull off something really cool in this genre. So I respect what it did in terms of found footage and what it did for the indie horror genre at that point.
Yeah, I mean the early 90s, mid 90s sort of was a return to slasher horror, like teen slashers. With sort and the meta ones as well. A lot of sort of CW casts made out a lot of those, or at that point the WB. So you sort of had like the Screams and the I Know What You Did Last Summers and the Urban Legends and films of that nature. And then the Blair Witch Project came along, and like I remember seeing it. I saw it twice in the theater actually. 2 completely different theaters that had 2 completely different reactions. So I at the time, I would have been about 19 years old. I remember I had a summer temp job for working data entry for a shipping company. And in the office where I worked, I shared an office with these 2 women who used to like to listen to the radio. And I remember hearing sort of the radio ad buys for the Blair Witch Project at that time, which was building up a lot of steam, particularly because of the marketing campaign. And these women swore that this movie was real because that was the marketing of the film, that this was a found footage film, that this was 3 people who went out into the woods and bad shit happened to them. And the only thing that ever was found were these tapes, and somebody put together what happened through the various cameras that they were shooting with. And as a result, this was all we know of their whereabouts, sort of what their last moments, their last days of being somewhere where somebody could have possibly found them. And the first time I saw it at an art house cinema up in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. It was like and this was like a real, before sort of this art house boom. So it was like an art house, and then next door was like a coffee shop. So it was like a coffee shop / art house cinema that maybe had it was either 1 or 2 screens. And that it played there before sort of it wound up with a wider release, before the masses really got their hands on it. And I remember seeing it late at night. It was a packed theater. I believe the theater actually had church pews as part of the seating arrangements inside the theater. I think they brought chairs in from the coffee house to really maximize how many people were there trying to get in to see this movie. People may have actually sat on the floor to be able to watch it. And I remember it really sort of being a chilling experience because there is just this inherent doom that feels like it's a part of the film as you're watching these people wander around the woods with really no way out, and the authenticity of it feeds into it. So the idea that they're sort of playing up that it was this real thing that happened, it feels real, and it allows you to sort of just suspend disbelief and buy in wholeheartedly as it happens. And it's a slow build as we go. The stickmen and the rocks. It's a very unique brand of horror. We talk about horror all the time, where horror is different people. Horror is subjective. Different people are frightened by different things, and there are people who would watch Blair Witch Project and say, "Well, I don't like it because nothing happens," and there are other people who go, "That's why I like it, because nothing happens." Is because I'm imagining everything that happens. So when you get sort of to the house, and you get like this mad dash where they hear the voice, and you have the guy in the corner, and the camera gets knocked loose. I remember watching that and sort of being terrified by what I was seeing, and leaving there and going out into where it was just woods and mountains up in the Poconos, and being like, this is some fucked up shit right now. and it resonated with that. And then a second time I saw it again, and I saw that in sort of with a multiplex crowd, and they weren't really driving with it at all. It just, once again, it sort of went back to like, oh, is that it? They were expecting to see The Witch, something a little bit more showy and whatnot. So going back to the Blair Witch Project, I love the Blair Witch Project. I still love the Blair Witch Project. I think it actually holds up fairly well, even with all the found footage that we've seen over the years. Because I think the characters are just done pretty well. I think the ending is, for me, it's one of those endings where I could vividly recall it, like moment by moment as it carries through. That's how well it affected me. So in 1999, I was one of those people that was a huge fan of the Blair Witch Project. So now, fast forward, here we are in 2016. Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett handled Blair Witch. What did you think of this particular sequel?
So let me tell you about the history I have with this movie.
Okay.
So at Comic-Con, I was at Comic-Con.
Okay.
And I was supposed to go to a party. I think it was a Warner Brothers TV party or something. I'd lost my voice totally. And they're like, hey, we're having – and I got invited to this party, and I got invited to a screening of The Woods, the new Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett movie, because it was called The Woods at that point.
Yes.
And they're like – and one of the studio people were like, you might want to go. There's news. There might be some news coming out of it. I'm like, okay, well, whatever. I can't talk right now. I might as well go see a movie because I'm going to have to review this thing down the line. I love The Guest. I love Your Next. Those are some of my favorite horror movies of the last, few years. I'm in. So I go and, I talk to some people and, like, oh, this is going to be cool, blah, blah, blah. So as now we now know as Blair Witch, because that was like the coming out party when everybody's like, they flipped the Twitter account, they flipped the website, they flipped everything. Like, oh, hey, it's a Blair Witch movie. And as you're watching it, again, you're going to see The Woods, so you're thinking, okay, well, I don't even know what I'm going to see. But then 5 minutes into it, you're like, oh, okay, well, this is a Blair Witch movie. So for me, that was cool because I was like, oh, I'm in a Blair Witch movie. But then, you go through the whole movie and everything, and then you're like, oh, well, that was another Blair Witch movie. So it was almost like I was let down by the fact that it was like a sequel. Because I went going and I was like, oh, I was expecting Your Next, or The Guest. These guys are known for such cool original films. And I was let down by the fact that it was just like, it was a Blair Witch movie. Now, I mean, it was in many ways it did improve on the first one. I mean, kind of the jump scares are a little bit better. There's a lot more stickmen running around. I did like the fact of like, they had a good plot device, and like the guy wants to go, he finds that there's a YouTube video up that looks like, Heather, the one of the people from the original film, it's her brother. He sees this YouTube video where he thinks she's there. So he has to go, he wants to go back to this house in the woods to figure out if she's still alive. And this is like 17 years later or whatever. It's almost like in real time. And So I did like how they kind of made it the YouTube generation. They got that a little bit more into it. And you still have stupid kids running around. I did like a lot of the kind of the stuff that they get into. It wasn't just kind of found footagey. It wasn't as the cameras everywhere and like all over the place. So I respected that too. And so it was bigger and better in many ways, but it just didn't do anything new. It wasn't that original. It just kind of it did. That 1999 film is so innovative and so good because there was nothing else like it at that time. So this is almost like Evil Dead 2 in a way, but whereas Evil Dead 2 actually improved upon Evil Dead, it was kind of like the exact opposite, where it's kind of the same movie, but the first one was a little bit better.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
I really wanted to like this movie. I really did. And yeah, going back to sort of the Comic-Con reveal, The Woods was coming in and the trailers were coming out and people were excited about seeing this new movie from Adam Wingard, who, like you mentioned, You're Next and The Guest, both films I really liked. Wasn't crazy about the VHS stuff. But I thought You're Next and The Guest really sort of showed what he could do making actual movies, like a real movie, as opposed to the VHS shorts, which are, I made me nauseous, to be perfectly honest. The Comic-Con reveal was really interesting because, there had been rumors floating around about people being interested in doing a Blair Witch, or if Lionsgate, who had the rights, were interested in doing Blair Witch. But I don't think anybody was really able to hammer down that they were actually making a Blair Witch. So when they sort of pulled this bait and switch, and my understanding is that Comic-Con, nobody knew until the movie actually started playing. Then shit, this is not The Woods anymore. And then, changing sort of the posters and the signage and whatnot. That is a very cool way to sort of grab people's attention. But I think in watching the film, and being excited about sort of venturing back towards the Blair Witch mythology with this particular film, I just didn't connect with this film anywhere near as well as I did with the first film. And I think you sort of bring it up is like, it doesn't do anything new. And while it's a sequel, it is far more of a modernization of the Blair Witch Project than it really is a sequel. Now, story-wise, it's a sequel, okay? Taking sort of Heather Donahue's disappearance and incorporating her little brother, who now wants answers about her disappearance. Yeah, in that respect, it's a sequel, much in the way that The Force Awakens is a sequel to Star Wars, even though it kind of does the same thing that Star Wars does. And as a result, you have sort of a 2016 version of the Blair Witch Project. You're introducing some technology. You got GPSs and walkie-talkies and drone cameras and all these things that weren't available to you in 1999, but in 2016 would have to be available to you if you wanted your audience to sort of buy in. Because if these people went out into the woods without any of that, people would be like, well, no wonder they're all going to die. They're all really dumb. So watching this, I really wanted to like this because of how much I love that first film, and it just didn't work very well for me. I think it's a valiant effort. I think it's an interesting, and at least it's a legitimate premise. It's not just, hey, we're going to, they try to make the story make sense for it to exist to begin with. It doesn't feel like a cash grab in any way of just them throwing things together and they're like, oh, we're making another Blair Witch Project. There seems to be a legitimate approach to try and do something else. But then once they get into the woods, there is nothing else. It's the same thing. And I found it problematic because the first film is very tight. You only have 3 people out there. So as a result, you spend a lot of time with these people. They're out there for a number of days. You get a sense of who they are, sort of their descent into madness as they're out there longer and sort of coming to grips with the fact that they may never get the hell out of here. And then, so as a result, you have sort of an incremental increase in tension while they're out there, including an incremental increase in what's happening to them and around them. Here, you have 6 people, so you have far less time to get to know many of these people beyond sort of this very surface level understanding of their relationships, which means you have very little time to form your own relationships with them on screen. And then once they're out into the woods, I think they're out there for only 2 nights. I mean, there's some time warping stuff that goes on there to make it seem like they're out there longer, but for all intents and purposes, they're only out there for like 2 nights. And then the film just takes off like out of a cannon. Like it just accelerates everything with all 6 people so that it never really slows down. It never really gives you a sense of what's happening. It's really hard sometimes to figure out what's happening because you're still processing what just happened to somebody else. So there's no time to really feel anything. There's no time to connect to anything. There's no time to be frightened by anything. And as a result, I felt like it was paced very slowly and then paced very quickly. And I didn't think that was a good mixture for how this film plays out.
Well, and 2, I mean, you go back to that original one, and like the documentary stuff with the townspeople in the first one is so good because it's really just good. Like you don't even know if are they real people? Are they not real people? Who's acting? Because everybody's talking about the legend, and that's how they really hook you into the fact of like, is this like a real documentary or not? I mean, I don't know at this point because it's so real. And then they're almost undone by the better technology because if back in '99, pre movie Twitter, pre everything, everything we know, there's it's black and white. I mean, the cameras suck. You can't hardly see them half the time, or you have those moments where you only see like the top quarter of somebody's head crying, but you really feel the emotion because just like it's right up in their face. Whereas this one, everything's the GPS, the digital cameras, everything's a little too neat, and it doesn't have the same feeling of like these are a bunch of kids in the woods and they are doomed as hell. You get that. I mean, you get the same kind of feeling for the new movie, but you're not in it with them as much as you are in that first one because you feel like you're in it with them, because you feel how tense it is. You can feel that like you don't know where the witch is coming. You don't know if you're gonna get a stick man in your head. You just don't feel, and it's just like it's this new one's not. It's safer. I feel it just doesn't have the same kind of like danger to it and the realness.
No, I mean, and I think that's part of the problem with sort of the way it's set up is just like the first film. They're out there for a number of days. I mean, they're out there, they're wandering. They keep, the map is missing at one point. They're really struggling with how to get out of there. How do we get back to civilization? How do we get back to the car? How do we find a road? How do we find, do we keep following the river? They're out there for a long time. And as they're out there, they're getting dirtier. They're getting crankier. They're getting more angry at themselves, at each other. And as a result, it builds the film, to a breaking point. So when you get to a breaking point, the film breaks on you in all the ways that you want it to. When it comes to this film, it doesn't do that because, like I said, they're only out there for I think 2 days. So they're out there one day and they're wandering around. They find they circle back and they find their camp again where they originally made up camp. So so they walk out. They're like, we'll make camp. Then they go to leave. They wander around. They're back to camp. They're like, well, I guess we're gonna have to stay here again. And then from there, it sort of jumps forward with where they want to get you to in building towards an ending. So it just feels very rushed in that it doesn't feel like the struggle that like there's that much of a struggle. As if sort of it's almost an inevitability that all of these people bad things are going to happen to them. The first film, even though you you sort of know with sort of the premise that this is a found footage film, that these people were never heard from, like the only thing that exists are the tapes of these people. Even as you watch that, you still sort of have this hope to one point until it feels like it's all going sour. And then your hope turns to sort of empathy, as if like, and horror, that you're going to watch these people slowly walk into death that they don't even know is coming for them. Here, it's just not the same. Here, I realize it's only like 89 minutes, but I feel like a lot of that time is wasted with things that don't necessarily progress the story in a tension-filled way that would provide a much more uneasy feeling to the audience. I think they sort of, in order to sort of be compliant with the audience, they do give more jump scares than the first film ever had. I think they sort of use that as a way to like, well, this will help, this will help correct some of the things that maybe the first film didn't do as well, where there are long stretches where nothing happens, by making something happen in those moments, creating a jump scare to happen so that the audience feels like they're not just watching the same thing of nothing happening again. But the problem is with that is that for me in the first film, the nothing happening creates this really uneasy feeling of watching it because you're waiting for something to happen. And for me, the anticipation of waiting for the bad thing to happen is sometimes worse for me psychologically than when just the bad thing happens, because I'm just, when is it going to happen? Is it going to happen here? Is it going to happen there? These people don't even know what's going to happen to them. I don't even know what's going to happen to them. It doesn't matter because you're sort of still blindly going along with them, even knowing, like having more of an inkling that like bad shit lurks on the horizon. In this film, I just never got the sense of that. I think there's too many characters. I think that it's then calling upon them to do too many things. And look, to kill 6 people takes longer than to kill 3 people.
True.
And when you have to kill all 6, you're going to have to space it out and leave some time to do that. And if you just smush it all together into like rapid fire murder, I don't know that it works as well.
Well, and I get on a, in a sense, I get the fact of like, these people loved the original 1999 movie. They felt that the sequel, Book of Shadows, which I can't remember, came out a few years later.
I think it was only like a year and a half, maybe after that.
Oh yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe calendar year, like 2 years. I can't remember offhand. But so and it wasn't found footage. It was like kind of more of a conventional horror film that I remember seeing. I did at the time. I didn't pay it. I haven't watched it. I haven't gone back and watched it at that point. Again, I hadn't gotten quite my critical look at movies at that point. So I respect the fact that they want to go back and like fix the thing they think shit on the legacy, like really do a tried and true sequel to Blair Witch. But with these guys, the thing with these guys is, I mean, you look at what they've done, and everything they've done kind of takes the conventional and turns it on its head. Mm-hmm. Your Next was a slasher where the last girl fights back. Yeah, it's all about that, and it was brilliant. I just love that movie to death. And then you go to to The Guest, which is like this weird 80s like domestic thriller retro. It's strange,
but it's really good.
So good.
It's really good. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like it taps into so much nostalgia and like weird 80s-ness in a cool way. Whereas this is just you're modernizing Blair Witch, and I'm just like, yeah, I would have rather seen The Wood. I would have rather seen some random thing where like the wood, like the happening where like the trees like fight back against the people or something. Or like woodland creatures attack.
I don't want to
just something new.
I don't want to see trees from the Wizard of Oz throwing apples at people again. How would you like it if somebody picked something off of you?
but I mean that I mean I and maybe that's kind of why I'm like weirdly angry at this movie, but because I'm like, again, I get that why they want to do a sequel to this, but these guys are so good, and these guys, and it came up with such good stuff, and we didn't need a modernization of the Blair Witch. I mean, we have a great Blair Witch Project movie from 17 years ago. It's fine by itself. Leave it alone.
I mean, my problem more comes from if you're going to do a sequel to the Blair Witch Project, then expand it, do something different with it. Mm-hmm. Don't just rehash a lot of it, because a lot of what this does, a lot of what this feels like, it just feels like a retread. It just feels like they're doing the same thing, and I don't think it captures the magic again. It's like trying to catch lightning in a bottle twice. Except if you've already seen one and it's really good, how do you equal that? Unless you're doing something different with it, and even when you're going back to introducing like the stickmen or the sort of rock towers, I don't know that in today just using that it is able to strike fear in the hearts of the people who are watching your movie. Because the reason that it worked so many years ago was because people thought that movie was real. And thought that these creepy things were happening and that they were leading to something else. Here, I mean, there are I think there's 2 instances. I don't want to go into a spoiler on it exactly on how it shakes out, but there are 2 instances of stickmen. I think there's 1 instances of pile of rocks. You get lots of trees falling. That's really what they're trying to do. But once again, it's just, I don't think it takes its time enough. The thing about the first film is when you're out. Look, I don't like going camping. Okay, I don't. I've never gone camping. I know people who want me to go camping. Every time they ask me to go camping, my initial response is "fuck that," because I don't want to be out in the middle of nowhere where wild animals could potentially eat me. And I don't like bugs. But I can only imagine laying out there in the middle of nowhere and hearing something and shitting my pants. So, hearing a twig break or something rustle outside, clearly movement of something, and being terrified of that happening. I think that works in films like this because there is sort of it's the boogeyman, the uncertainty of what lies in the dark, coming to get you. But you gotta really hammer that home. You gotta start small and then build your way up to getting, to the house, or to ultimately, the Blair Witch. You gotta learn how to crawl before you can walk, before you can run. This movie crawls and then tries to run 100-meter sprint against Usain Bolt, and I just wasn't feeling it, and I felt really disappointed walking out of this. I am sure walking out of this, I felt the way that the people who don't like this movie or the original movie felt in 1999. And look, and the original movie is divisive. There are people who love it and there are people who don't. There's not a lot of middle ground when it comes to the Blair Witch Project. There's not a lot of like, it's okay. It's either like, no, that was really good, or nah, I don't get it. I walked out of this feeling like those people who didn't get it in 1999, where it just didn't do anything for me, and it kind of makes me sad with how much I love that original movie. So for me, even though I think there are things at times, I know I've been harping a lot on the things I didn't like about it. I think the premise is interesting. I think there's a built-in tension there that still permeates just the fact that you're seeing a Blair Witch sequel. There are little touches here and there that I like. sprinkled throughout the film. I like sort of the locals that come camping along with them. I think their story is kind of interesting. So I think, look, there are some spots here that I think are creative. But ultimately, I just don't think this film sticks the landing. And as much as I wanted to really like this film, I can't recommend the Blair Witch. I would rather you go and spend 90 minutes watching the original again, because I think it's just a better movie. And it does the same thing.
And it's just like, and I, again, like you said, it's not terrible. There's some good stuff in it. But when you compare it to things like Lights Out and Don't Breathe, and like there's so much kind of good original horror out there, kind of breaking the mold, and then you have this as kind of like rebuilding the mold a little bit. It's kind of a disappointment.
I think sitting on your couch, I think if you turned out the lights and sat on your couch and got the original and watched it again, you would get more out of paying money to go into a theater and watching this on the big screen. Yeah. Because even though the format is different, I just think that first film is better. I think it's better in everything that it does. I think it's better with its characters. I think it's better with its story. I think it's better with its build. I think it's far better with its climax. I know people who saw those who told me that the last 5 minutes of this film were scarier than the last 5 minutes of the first film. And when I walked out of this movie, I thought they were drunk because I was like, what are they crazy? Because I didn't think so. And once again, and there's some good moments in that as well. The overall way that it's put together, not a fan of Blair Witch. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I could probably talk about these two movies all day, between the Blair Witch Project and Blair Witch. But this podcast is not going to go on all day. So I think we'll leave it with the fact that both of us have some issues, pretty major issues with Blair Witch, and are not fans. The second and final film we're going to talk about this week is Snowden. This is the Oliver Stone film about Mr. Edward Snowden, the whistleblower, the NSA whistleblower who released a number of information about the bulk data collection that the National Security Agency, I believe, NSA, was doing both around the world and to United States citizens, particularly in a post-9/11 society. Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays the title character of Ed Snowden, and the film also co-stars Shailene Woodley, Melissa Leo, Zachary Quinto, Tom Wilkinson, Scott Eastwood, and Logan Marshall Green. As well as Timothy Olyphant. I can never leave out Timothy Olyphant getting credit. And sort of is a dramatization of the events as depicted in the documentary Citizen 4, as well as sort of Edward Snowden's life coming up through the intelligence agencies, how he was a part of the system in creating it, and ultimately how he was a part of the system in sort of revealing what the United States government was doing behind closed doors. So Snowden, Brian, how did this one do for you this week?
I remember last week we talked about the fact of like sometimes people's stories you shouldn't read on a big screen.
Yeah, that was talking about Sully. Yes.
So yeah, we were talking about Sully. I kind of feel a little bit the same about this. When that whole thing went down a few years ago with Edward Snowden, him working with Glenn Greenwald and others to reveal all this stuff, and this stuff kept coming, government freaking out, Edward Snowden like trying to get to Brazil or wherever, or he's on a plane, he's not on a plane, he's on a plane, he's not a plane, he's all of a sudden in Russia. Are we gonna go get him in Russia? So that stuff, and the stuff in Citizen 4 is really, really gripping stuff. I mean, it shows what an interesting story this is. It taps into the, no pun intended, about the the surveillance thing. How we're all where the government has eyes on us all. It's not just like the bad guys. Are we the bad guys? Or they're hacking us, but are we hacking them first? That sort of thing. So a lot of this stuff is interesting, and so you on the surface, Oliver Stone doing that movie makes total sense, because you're like, you think of his filmography as like conspiracy theory, real life figure. Oliver Stone's going to be all about that. But he doesn't do anything interesting with the story. In fact, he makes the story kind of like, conventional. it's just like a new, like the news. Whereas you had Citizen 4 that created such an interesting narrative and like the real guy, and it's just like it was so good. And then you're like this, where you have Joseph Gordon-Levitt kind of in a weird monotone. You have Rhys Ifans and Nicolas Cage kind of chewing scenery as like weird CIA company men. The framing device is that secret meeting, but in between we get a lot of the kind of the 10 years before the leak, and how he was, he was started as a military guy, got injured, so he wanted to serve his country, went to the CIA, kept getting higher and higher security clearance and stuff, gets to see the internal things that like kind of make him wonder what we're doing, and he's a quote unquote he's a real patriot, so he's got to do the right thing, and gets in trouble for it. But it's just like Oliver Stone can do so much interesting stuff because the guy has so much chutzpah and panache and style with some of his other movies like JFK and Nixon and things like that. Whereas it just comes off as just really conventional and pedestrian.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of this film. I think it's okay.
It's okay.
It's really nothing special, and it's been a while since I could really point to an Oliver Stone film that I really dig. And I think especially in this film, there are times when he wants to sort of say something, but I don't know how. I don't think he knows exactly how to go about saying it, and I think he's sort of lost that subtlety at times. And at times can be very, very heavy-handed with really trying to beat you over the head with the message that he wants to deliver to you. And at times he does here, especially when he's sort of moving between administrations where he sort of wants to like beat you over the head with like, hey, look, everybody's doing it. They're all bad. Like they're all in on it. All the government is in on it. Look how terrible they are. And you go back to sort of the earlier films, Natural Born Killers, or you even go to JFK and the conspiracy theories brought about with that. Or even something, the earlier stuff I think is really where he was masterful at social commentary, political commentary, things that we really wanted to intelligently bring to the table for you to consider. I think he's just sort of lost that touch now. But with Snowden, I think there is an interesting thread throughout the film dealing with sort of how the government disappointed this guy once he learned how it sort of operates. Because when you do start off, you sort of have him, he's doing military training. He wants to be in the special forces. He is, sort of this flag waving patriot who wants to serve his country. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's his model. Like he thinks the government is, he thinks the United States is the greatest place in the world. He thinks the government is exceptional. He thinks we serve the people. He is sort of this naive, idealistic, United States fanatic, and watching him sort of turn away from that little by little throughout the film as he learns how things sort of really work. I thought that was an interesting thread throughout the film. So just watching just little bits of his trust and his love of both his country and the government be chipped away by the more he knows, the more he learns, the more he's exposed to. That I found to be an interesting part of the film. Everything else, it's sort of things that we've already been through. So I think Citizen 4 isn't going to dazzle you cinematically, but to sit down and watch Citizen 4, it's really eye-opening to learn about that in a very straightforward way as they sort of explain how things work, showing you how certain things work, that if you were in the dark to that point, it is really jarring. This, it's sort of almost running a parallel to Blair Witch. It's stuff that we already know, or stuff we've seen done, or stuff we've already had explained to us. So to watch it sort of dramatized really doesn't bring anything new to the table, other than maybe humanizing this guy who is really seen in one of two ways because of what he's done. So he's either, a patriotic whistleblower, or he is a traitor. He has betrayed his country. And that is sort of the two dynamics that Edward Snowden has operated on since the release of the NSA information, is that he is either one or the other. I think this film tries to humanize him, tries to make him a real person as opposed to just something on one side or the other. And it does that, through introducing a romance angle with Shailene Woodley, which I don't know necessarily quite works because I just don't think they do enough with it. And you sort of have like these CIA spooks, like Nicolas Cage, who like the second he shows up just feels bizarre in this movie. There's Risa Fons as sort of his mentor in the CIA, who, as he gets sort of as JGL gets deeper into sort of the intelligence community, starts to loom larger and more ominously over his career. There's this real weird telecom dialogue they have where it's like Edward Snowden in this dark conference room, and then this giant wall of Risa Fons like talking to him, and it's just an okay movie. Like, watching it, I didn't feel like I was getting anything new out of it. I didn't feel like I was getting anything all that interesting out of it. It's finely made, I guess. I think Levitt is fine as Edward Snowden, but this movie it really didn't do anything all that interesting for me.
What I do like that he did, I mean, you're dealing with computers and people on phones and things like that. This computer world is inherently dull to watch on a screen. So he uses some interesting thriller elements, especially kind of near the end when Edward Snowden's in Hawaii and he's trying to get all the information out, and sneak it out so he can leak it. So there's some interesting thriller type elements that he puts in there, and a use of a Rubik's Cube that's interesting. I do like how he's taking something like inherently really, really dull and making it at least a little exciting. And there's some tension there. You kind of know what happens, obviously, because anybody who's like paid attention to the news for any time in the last 3 years kind of knows what's happened. But it's still kind of like you wonder if he can actually get out, or if the security guards are going to get him and things like that. So that's interesting, and he does a good job in crafting some of that. But just it doesn't feel like an Oliver Stone film. An Oliver Stone film is just like in your face, just like challenging you, or it's like putting stuff up. You're like, I can't believe he just did that, or kind of like, oh, that's going to piss off a lot of people. There's so much stuff that he's done in like other movies, or you look back at Platoon and it's just so gripping, and you're just like you're in the war with them, or JFK, where you're like, what is he even thinking making this movie? Just there's so much that he's done that's like really good, and then he just does this, and it's just I feel like he's just a fan of the guy, and it's just like wanting to do a dramatization of like Citizen 4, but like we have Citizen 4, so we don't need this movie.
Yeah, it just there are times when he wants to try and, like I said, he wants to try and say something about this, and and you bring up the fact that he's a fan of Edward Snowden, and you could go into sort of Oliver Stone's political crazy a little bit over the years, and sort of understand why he would be so entranced by the story. And that's not to pass judgment on Edward Snowden one way or the other, but you can understand sort of what about that story fascinates Oliver Stone because of sort of Oliver Stone's stance on a number of things. But I think when it comes throughout this film, you wind up, you end up having these debates that are sort of wedged into the movie that never feel like a organic part of these characters or the way they talk or the way they operate. So you can have these conversations about sort of security versus privacy. You have these conversations about, like, what is the United States role in the world, and sort of, what is the NSA doing with all this bulk data? Like, why are they doing this? And sort of, dealing with the military industrial complex and who's happy and war and all of that. But all the way that it unfolds is in conversations that never feel real. It feels like somebody prompts something, like somebody says something, and then it prompts this sort of lecturing, talking points, conversation between two people that I don't think two people of this nature in any of these sequences would ever really have. It just doesn't feel like that in the way that he portrays them as people and as characters. So yeah, look, I think some of the computer stuff is interesting. I think when you watch sort of Edward Snowden work, on the computers, when he's sort of dealing with other people, when they're sort of talking about how this sort of functions, how they're building these programs, how they're using their malware, when they're talking about sort of webcams and how that operates and how easy it is to monitor some things. Some of that is interesting. I mean, granted, it's stuff that we know and we've seen before, but the way it's sort of tied into the film, some of that is interesting. But watching this film, and it's like 2+ hours. He tries to turn it into this spy thriller towards the end that I just don't think quite work. I don't know that there's enough with Edward Snowden here as an interesting party, as we sort of, to go back to your original point, to make an interesting film about him. I think what he did is interesting. I think why he did it is interesting. And maybe if you want to get into sort of why it all exists in the first place, can be interesting. But to sort of go through him in a biopic sort of fashion, sort of starting with his commitment to the United States and, defending freedom, up to and through the leak, I just don't know that it makes for a compelling watch. And much like Blair Witch, I think you're better off just taking your time and spending it watching Citizen 4 as an overall more interesting motion picture than you are watching Snowden. So I think this week we have a case of two films that are lined up against other material that do the exact same thing as those two films. They just do it in a far superior fashion that the two films we're talking about this week, they seem unnecessary and they pale in comparison.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think that's really the summary of the week is between, and this is to recap, between Blair Witch and Snowden, you have two films that feel remarkably like rehashes of better handling of the same material, between the Blair Witch Project of 1999 and Citizen 4, which is, I think, 2004. I could be, I'm probably wrong on that date. But recent history. So our recommendation this week would be watch those original films. Watch the Blair Witch Project, watch Citizen 4. We think you'll get more out of it than watching Blair Witch, which is fine, and watching Snowden, which is fine. But if you want good, just go back to the original source material. So with that said, those are the two films on this week. So you decide amongst yourselves what you might want to go out there and see. Brian, before I let you go, let everybody know where it is they can find you out there on the interwebs.
Sure. I'm on Twitter at Brian Truitt. I'm always doing stuff at life.usatoday.com. And I also co-host the Geek Culture podcast, The Mothership. And you can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, all that kind of good stuff.
And a frequent guest on the Match Game. So
and Charles Nelson Riley on Lifted Embargo.
Yeah. So make sure you find and follow all Brian's work out there in the world. Always a good read, always a good listen. So make sure you check it out and make it a part of your regular routine on a weekly basis. As for us, make sure you follow our social media as well at Tis Infamous. That's for our mothership, our home sweet home of This Is Infamous. That's the Twitter handle there. So you'll be notified of all the good content that goes up via the Twitter feed. So follow at Tis Infamous. And you can follow me at Infamous Kid, Kidd, for all my random ramblings and musings, my stream of consciousness put into the written word in 140 characters or less. Follow me on Twitter at Infamous Kid. Over on Facebook, facebook.com/tisinfamous, facebook.com/BillyTheKid. Like both of those pages, participate in the discussion threads and get involved. You'll get out what you put in or something like that. Just like both those pages. It's nice to see the numbers go up. Podcasts can be found wherever podcasts can be found. So you found us this one time, but if you want to keep finding us, you can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Blueberry, Google Play. Just make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that it's home delivered to your mobile device every time a brand new episode comes out, as well as rate the show and leave a comment for the show. So leave us 5 stars, jot down a few words, letting us know what you think of the podcast, and that goes a long way, and I greatly appreciate it. As far as my regular work, you can find it at thisisinfamous.com. So whether it's written, video, or audio, always good content going up there. So check it out at thisisinfamous.com. I want to thank my guest, Brian Truitt. I have been your host, Billy Donnelly. This has been the Lifted Embargo. So I'll be back next week talking to somebody else about more movies. You can bet on that. In the meantime, go find something to watch because there's always something good if you look hard enough. Have yourself a pleasant, immediate future. We're out for now. Peace. The Lifted Embargo is a podcast presentation of This Is Infamous.